All right, looks like we're doing it. The big one, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And 2025 marks the 10-year anniversary of a pretty important album and also a pretty important review on my main channel. That would be my video on Kendrick Lamar's one and only To Pimp a Butterfly, my favorite rap record, hands down, of the 2010s, and an album I gave a 10 out of 10 score to, a review that has risen to be my most popular among my entire review catalog, and by a pretty wide margin. I mean, there are reviews over the years that have accumulated millions of views, but 7.5 million is most definitely far and away the most viewed review I've ever done. This is a 22-minute deep dive into the album. Did it at a place that I used to live at before I changed the wallpaper. We had a lovely little floral print there at the time. Yeah, the room was pretty freshly moved into, so there's definitely like some white noise that was on the microphone still at this point. A lot of room ambiance around my voice too. Definitely not the aesthetic choices I would make had I the chance to do it all over again. And again, this is a review that is still getting pretty actively engaged with on a regular basis as this album has gone down to achieve modern classic status. If this album was called Donda 2, you would have given it a 10. Great job being totally unserious. An album we pretty much did get, a score that this review did have, and a complete waste of my time. I guess also at 21:57 in the review, I may have predicted 6-7, so looking forward to seeing if that's the case. Also, I love the description that got laid out in the D-Box over here. Several years ago, Kendrick Lamar was hip-hop's underdog. Today, he's dropping what's possibly the best rap album of the decade. Man, I was seemingly a little more into predictions back then. Wow. But yeah, without any further ado, here we go. 10 years before now. Haven't aged a day. Let's get into the review and see, has my opinion changed much at all? I mean, I know I still love the album, but everything in this review, would I still say it the same way today? And also, I know there are some teachers and classes that actually do use this video as like a shining example of modern music criticism, which anyone who is doing that or has done that, I'm very flattered. I thank you kindly. But I'm also going to be watching this sort of thinking whether or not the video really works in that lens. And yeah, my To Pimp a Butterfly review. We are about to find out. Let's do it. Bam. Hey everyone. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. God damn, that room noise is crazy. My voice is booming all over those walls. I appreciate anybody who like literally sat through this 20-minute review. I appreciate you greatly. And it's time for a review of the new Kendrick Lamar album. That also kind of takes me back before I have the opportunity to like really get into this whole thing, because this is when I used to actually like literally physically write down all my notes. These days, I mostly type out the review or type out bullet points and that sort of thing, and it's like all digital. But like back then, I was in an era where it was a lot easier to commit all of my thoughts to memory if I wrote them down physically. So I was like literally jotting down every note and thought that I would have around a record. And sometimes my thoughts would be a little chaotic as a result, because it would be difficult to kind of go back and read some of my notes as they were like scrawled all over the place on these scrap pieces of paper. To Pimp a Butterfly. He's gonna review it. Oh, there's a cow skit. Let's go. Review it. West Coast rapper, Black Hippie member, Top Dog Entertainment member, Kendrick Lamar. And I've been telling. What am I laughing at? What's so funny, Anthony? What's got y'all giggly? Anyway, I still do this to this day. I love hyping up an artist. I love hyping up an album like I'm about to introduce like a wrestler or a boxer into the ring, and they're going to come in and kill it or something. Telling you since 2011.
Kendrick Lamar has something. He's got something going on. Section 80, great album. An album on which Kendrick showcased a kind of nasal, high-pitched voice, but a lot of personality. He had flow, he had a lot to say, and he had a knack for writing catchy, kind of accessible, enjoyable hip-hop songs with a socially aware edge.
Agreeing with everything so far. Damn, I'm killing it. I'm smashing it. Who the hell is this reviewer guy? This guy might go on to be one of the best reviewers of all time. What the fuck?
A talent he would go on to sharpen with his next full-length LP, Good Kid, Mad City.
That he did, even though the cover art here is a little misaligned with the edge of that goofy-ass green screen square, which has always been misshapen that I've been using for years. But yes, he did in fact do that.
An album that in a few short years has been widely acknowledged as one of hip-hop's best records and one of modern music's best concept albums. This,
you know, it's been interesting to sort of see almost like the competition over the years between the Good Kid, Mad City heads versus the two Pimp a Butterfly heads. Personally, I feel like two legends can exist at the same time, but you know, there's almost like a hostility between the people who prefer each of these albums, and like I could sort of get it and understand it on some level because some of the things that you know, make Good Kid, Mad City special and make it enjoyable are not qualities that Two Pimp a Butterfly shares, like, you know, its accessibility, its directness in terms of like its narrative for one. TPAB isn't quite as literal. It's a bit more abstract. The instrumentals are also a lot more winding and ambitious and all over the place. And sometimes there are going to be people who are like more drawn to those abstract qualities and maybe that sense of chaos or that wider versatility with TPAB. And as a result, maybe they'll see like, you know, Good Kid, Mad City as lesser. A lot of people were like jumping down my throat at the time that I reviewed that album because I did not slap it with a 10. I merely gave it like, you know, very, very beefy 9. And, you know, at the time when I gave that review, I was like, this is great. This is killer. This is probably going to go down as one of the best rap records for a long time. But I feel like Kendrick can like, you know, jump over this. I feel like Kendrick can outdo himself on his next record. Like it felt like the potential was there with Good Kid, Mad City. Like again, there were a lot of people who were angry with me feeling like this is peak, this is the best, this is amazing. And you know, no ill will toward anybody who still feels that way about this album. It's an amazing album. At least in my own mind, I was like, I think he can outdo this. I feel like there's something in him on this record that to me feels like I have not reached my full power level yet, and I'm glad that I ended up kind of seeing it that way because I think that ended up panning out.
Record told the story, a story of a young Kendrick Lamar, or maybe many a young man from Compton, California, caught up in dreams of success, peer pressure, drugs, gang violence. The record is a fantastic, nuanced, and very detailed character portrait. This was really Kendrick Lamar's breakout album. He was sounding so much less like an outsider.
Oh my God.
With this
I know I'm going to give the album a 10, and I'm so excited. I'm talking so fast. I'm not normally talking this fast. I'm talking kind of fast now, but anyway. I can sense how tense and excited I am in this review, and I love that. I'm loving that.
Big feature, the trendier beats, the Dr. Dre feature, big singles like Swimming Pools that had a trap-influenced instrumental, as well as...
Okay, I think I threw that in there because I was probably feeling this being 2015 like a bit of a rising response to anytime I would talk about trap music, which there were a lot of great trap records to talk about in the first half of the 2010s, or at least interesting ones and viral ones and very influential ones. And again, as a result, I was just covering a lot of albums on that front. And, you know, especially when I would talk about the hi-hats and so on and so forth, people would turn it into a meme in the comments. It was silliness, but you know, all in good fun still.
It was a message that was obviously anti-substance abuse, but the song was kind of masked as a drinking song. Even though I loved...
Okay, now the cover is actually aligned a little more properly. See, there you go. That's that Fantano production magic. But Either way, Kendrick Lamar sneaking your vegetables into the song, sneaking your thoughtful vegetables into the easy to listen to catchy songs in the way that he does.
This record, when it came out, and I still love it now, I couldn't help but feel like Kendrick kind of compromised on this album. I'm going to make trendier music, but I'm going to do it on my own terms. And even if it is trendier, I don't really mind if the music itself and the message behind the music is fantastic. But I was left after this album wondering, where could Kendrick go after this? Will he continue to try to appeal to more mainstream tastes? In a way, I felt like that might have been the case the first time I heard the blend of pop music, hip hop, and soul on that track certainly had kind of a radio-friendly sound. And the track actually ended up winning Kendrick a few Grammys, kind of proving that song's pop appeal. But instead of just hanging in this safe zone and making blander music, Kendrick continued to experiment and make some pretty bold statements, like with the track Blacker the Berry. Then we started getting word of some of Kendrick's collaborators and producers on this record. People like Flying Lotus, George Clinton of Parliament Funkadelic.
Man, not the Skippy edits making a comeback. I forget when I stopped doing the Skippy edits entirely, and I threw the ILU in there. It's true. I do love you. That is true. I love you guys for making this whole review fantasy possible. My dark, twisted review music fantasy. But yeah, to rewind a little bit there, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. I was not really crazy about the song as a single to this album. It just felt like a very kind of like regimented soul, pop, rock fusion that it just wasn't as exciting and was just not quite as, I guess, thrilling a listen because the instrumentation just felt too boxed in, too in the DAW, too whatever you want to call it, to feel loose and, electrifying. But and I will say this in the review, I know I say at least this, but the live version that's on the final version of the album, the live version comes alive, is incredible, is amazing. I'm so glad that Kendrick ended up switching it up on the final version of it, and ended up kind of like presenting it in such a theatrical way with the crowd responding and the audience noise and all that. Just what a master stroke there with that move.
Bassist extraordinaire, Thundercat, underrated femc, Rhapsody, one of the Isley brothers, and neo-soul singer Bilal, among others. And this change really shows up in the sound of this album. There is not a trendy instrumental in sight anywhere on this record. There is no swimming pools.
Okay, we'll correct myself there. Obviously on this record, you do have songs like All Right, which has gone on to be a pretty massive hit. And, I would say the beat, the rhythms on that track are maybe some of the most trendy, but there's still like a lot of jazz influence going on in, some of the instrumentation on that song. So, it's not like the entire record is inaccessible or anything like that. It's like the most out there rap album in the world. It's just in comparison with his last record, it's very clear Kendrick Lamar was not trying to, market himself in a super mainstream way, make his music appeal in as mainstream a way as he did on Good Kid, Mad City. It's clear that now that he had everyone's ears and eyes and attention, he really wanted to wow them and take them somewhere new, take them somewhere ambitious, kind of push people's and challenge people's expectations and tastes, which is something that, I feel like there is a severe lack of in the mainstream these days. I think the music industry has kind of formed in such a way to where it has made it more difficult for mainstream artists to experiment, to try something new, to challenge their fans, to do something that will actually sort of like, subvert their expectations. And I'm so happy this album ended up doing exactly that. And, as a result, it is still very much worth discussing and, revisiting and diving back into and, rethinking what its context in modern music is, because it is such a fantastic anomaly in a lot of ways.
Kendrick is very upfront with the sonic direction of this album, with a lot of strong instrumentals pulling from jazz, some really groovy Parliament Funkadelic inspired drums and bass, psychedelic, smooth, dreamy, creamy neo soul.
Whoa, dreamy, creamy. Anthony, you going crazy on the dreamy, creamy? What the hell? Wow. Okay. Damn. But the dreamy, creamy. Anthony, shit.
The flavor of this record has a distinctly old school tone to it. Like Kendrick is really going back to the glory days of Dr. Dre, Snoop, The Far Side, and Tupac. But there's something really modern and detailed about these beats too. Kendrick even pulls a left hook in the track listing here by tossing in a live performance version of the song I, rather than in the gussied up studio version, which I actually prefer this move. The raw aesthetic of the live performance of this track sounds fantastic.
I agree with me. I agree with me on that. I'm agreeing with myself. You see that? It's, nobody else will do it. So, somebody's got to agree with me. 10 years later, it's got to be me.
On the song goes over pretty well, and there's kind of an Outkast Hey Ya vibe on this track too. Throwing this version on the record actually plays into the narrative of the album, this anthem about self-love and self-esteem. I think in a way, Kendrick kind of sees this song as falling on deaf ears with the crowd of people he's trying to communicate it to, which is why toward the end of the song, the track gets derailed by a really kind of, angry, frustrated, and restless crowd with whom Kendrick tries to plead and asks for, calmness, civility, telling him that black people are tired of playing the victim, saying that he has no time to waste time. The very next track on here, Mortal Man, you kind of see Kendrick Lamar.
Okay, just a bit of a sidebar there. I mean, something to note, because this has continued to be a major theme in Kendrick's music, is just, again, that relationship between him and his audience with respect to his aspirations to save them, inform them, enlighten them, show them a different path to choose, a way to embark upon that will improve their lives in some form or fashion. And again, it's been interesting to sort of see how this has shifted over the years, because on, Good Kid, Mad City, there was almost kind of like, I don't know, a hope there, a naivete. Kendrick very much seemed like, this is something I have the power and the will and the ability to do, as long as I do it the right way, do it perfectly, really sort of like, put in the drive to make it happen. And on To Pimp a Butterfly, we see him sort of like, engaging in this portrayal of like, I'm encouraging my audience, I'm communicating to them what I'm trying to communicate, I'm trying to say what needs to be said, I'm trying to show them the way, but there's pushback. There's rejection, there's friction there, there's difficulty of the message coming across or being received in the way that I want it to be received. And then, we get the downward spiral from there into Kendrick sort of becoming dejected and depressed about, this message not being taken, and him kind of coming to the realization that maybe he doesn't have the power and the sway and the impact that he once thought he did or could if he did all the right things and communicated all the right messages, kind of making his peace with that eventually on Mr. Morale, but then almost kind of like falling back into his old habits a little bit on GNX. And who knows where he stands on this issue now. I mean, most likely this savior complex, which I've called it before, is something Kendrick is always going to be wrestling with and dealing with in some way. But still, it's just kind of interesting to go back and think about the point at which it existed here on this album in his trajectory.
Lyrically questioning the devotion of his fans, asking them if they will still be a fan when the shit hits the fan. And it's stuff like this that sets Kendrick apart from not just other rappers, but specifically other conscious rappers. While it seems like Kendrick might want to fix the world,
throwing the paper around,
in a way, I think he kind of sees it as futile or maybe even like an impossible task. But for an artist like Kendrick, changing minds with your art is a worthy cause, worth the effort, even if the boulder of problems in front of you moves just only an inch after you've dropped dead of exhaustion after all of your trying. To Pimp a Butterfly is structured in a pretty interesting way. It's not a story album. It's not another Good Kid, Mad City. It's like a series of separate but very much connected vignettes. And given how dramatic and grand and rich a lot of the instrumentation and the vocal performances on this record are, guitar, I actually feel like I'm watching, not just listening, but watching in my mind, a really elaborate stage show. And that is not a far-fetched comparison considering all of the strange sonic detours on this record, the effects, the instrumental interludes, the various voices. We have Kendrick changing up his flow, his voice, his inflection constantly, a pretty wide instrumental palette. You have smooth, sexy funk.
Just sidebarring here, again, love that I'm bringing all this stuff up, love that I'm saying all this stuff, but once more want to note, I appreciate the fact that Kendrick as an artist did not stop evolving here and continue to experiment with his voice, with his inflections, with his flows. I love that as versatile as his voice is on To Pimp a Butterfly, he sounds very much different now on GNX with the flows and inflections that he's doing currently with like, you know, kind of these looser, goofier cuts that, you know, are maybe not taking themselves quite as seriously, at least some of the time. But yeah, I appreciate that what has made Kendrick such an interesting artist on this album still remains to be interesting, but it's interesting in a different way. And, you know, it's really like a kind of a generational talent thing to be able to do that and maintain that for such a long time.
Music on here, like with the song These Walls, and then you have hardcore hip hop with just a little bit of 90s boom bap inspiration on Blacker the Berry. And this is something I'd never heard before. We have this poem being told at the end, or maybe at the very beginning, of nearly every track on this album. And as Kendrick starts this poem with each attempt, he just gets a little further into the poem, each time reciting what he has already said in the poem on previous tracks. And whatever words he leaves off on before the next track starts sort of dictate
the hell's going on outside? What's going on? What is going on in my world? What is happening around me? But anyway, before I finish my point here, I do want to say, like, this poem, the way it almost kind of like blocks each section of the song out in different chapters. You know, I could even call it chapters. Yeah, you know, that's kind of a thing that I should say. Good Kid, Mad City feels a lot like a movie. To Pimp a Butterfly feels a lot more like a book. Feels a lot more like a book.
Theme or somehow tell you about the oncoming track. And then at the very end of the album, he tells the entire poem that he's written, and it reveals a few different things. One, that this entire poem ties up very beautifully every single theme on the album. And the second thing that's revealed is that the entire time, Kendrick has been telling this poem to Tupac.
The layers, man. The layers, bro. I'm laughing. The layers are so good. I'm laughing my ass off. The layers are so good.
Yes, he's telling this poem to Tupac. He just sort of, you know, talks a little bit after he's finished and, you know, goes to ask a question. And who is answering back? None other than Tupac Shakur.
You know, not only was that whole final moment on this record just so amazingly pulled off, not just in terms of like how well written the poem is and how it kind of segments the different arguments or points or perspectives that Kendrick is trying to relay throughout the record, but I love the way that he was able to like snatch this audio from this Tupac interview and reframe it in a way with a conversation with him to where it felt like natural, like he was literally talking with the guy. What's funny to me is like in the wake of Drake's tailor-made freestyle or you know, AI kind of being on the rise in the way that it is, I've seen a lot of people make like the most moronic arguments, just being like, oh, you can't fabricate things people are saying and doing with AI. Kendrick Lamar had Tupac on the TPAB album like he was talking to him. But yeah, there you go. Let's continue.
And Kendrick continues to converse with this no longer alive man about things like politics and money and success in the music industry in a very natural way. I thought this was like an actor or maybe some kind of crazy voice hologram thing because, you know, we had the dance and Snoop Dogg Tupac hologram thing. But then I came to learn that everything Tupac is saying comes from this old interview recorded in the 90s. Kendrick took his favorite snippets from it and then wrote the questions afterwards and pulled together this just beautifully cohesive conversation. It's really a mindfuck moment. And then he ends the entire track off with another poem recitation that actually sort of ties up and explains the whole "To Pimp a Butterfly" theme, which is actually pretty beautiful and makes me feel bad for anybody who is, currently hating on the title of this album, because it actually has quite a bit of poignance and meaning if you actually pay attention to the final words of this record. So there are some completely new and whacked out things that Kendrick does all over this record. And
maybe that aside doesn't really make a whole lot of sense 10 years later, but like I will say, for those of you who think like the irrational hatred or people just going out of their way to misunderstand everything Kendrick says and does, even though he lays a lot of it out pretty freaking clear. This is very much not a new thing. It's not a new phenomenon. It is not something that, has just become a trend like since the beef. No, irrational Kendrick haters have been a thing easily since the mid-2010s. And in desperation to find something to hate, yes, of course, they were commenting on, the title of this record, be like, oh, "To Pimp a Butterfly, what's that? That's stupid. Why would you pimp a butterfly? What does that even mean?" Which again, just clowning on this album, you sound stupid. Ask J. Cole.
And every single one of them goes over incredibly well. Flying colors. And he has a lot to say on this record as well, like with his previous albums. And even though Kendrick on this album is addressing a lot of hot button issues, taking on things that we see as being very large and very political, he brings it down and makes it personal, makes it relatable, or at least emotional, or something to sympathize with. He's not this rapper who's just gonna like spit statistics at you like, "Oh, this many people died. Feel something." Rather than that, Kendrick gives you a compelling point of view, or at least connects the dots so that you can kind of see why someone would have the mindset that he has, or the mindset of people who he might be talking about or portraying on this album. He does.
Okay, before I go any further, I want to echo what I was just saying there and also dig into that point a little bit deeper, because there's a variety of ways you or any artist could write around a social issue, write around a topic that is seen as political. You could take something like the Rage Against the Machine or System of a Down approach, where, maybe there is a personal element there to it, but you're not writing quite as much from a personal perspective. You're talking about it in a broad sense, maybe even bringing up or highlighting facts, stats, occurrences, and just kind of sounding the alarm and getting outraged and, just like pointing out the severity and the insanity of the things that you're trying to focus in on. And then another way of going about it is to take whatever it is and just basically explore. And I feel like this is the way that kind of resonates with maybe more the average person. Explore how it just impacts you in the most specific, personal way, while neither is wrong, in my opinion, and both can be done in a way that is terrible. Like, neither is a fail-safe way of making a great song. Doing it in a more personal way, I feel like draws a lot more people in to be like, "Oh, I relate to that." And even if you don't relate to it personally, you can still, if you're a human being with a functioning brain, dig up the empathy required to sort of say, well, that didn't happen to me. I'm coming from a walk of life where that's unlikely to happen to me. But as a person, I can see if that were to happen with me, or if that was my struggle, that would be pretty terrible. And look, Kendrick Lamar has written in ways that I think take both approaches, take mixes of, these approaches, either on this record or on tracks like Auntie Diaries as well. Like, literally the most clear and obvious example of this. Here is an issue socially and politically that everybody is talking about and thinking about to some degree right now. Here is how it is impacting me on the most personal level through my everyday life, through my family. And here are my thoughts on it with respect to that. And, again, I think it's an approach that a lot of people at the end of the day end up relating to a little bit more, because most people are not like politically minded. Most people are not electorally minded. Most people, when they are thinking about these issues, if they're thinking about them at all, the context in which they are processing them and making sense of them is usually, how is this impacting my everyday life? And going from there.
Does this as he raps about black artists who are blinded by money and fame and success, while simultaneously being exploited by the music industry. He raps about living up to musical and political heroes. He raps about trying to stay in touch with his roots and his neighborhood and his friends while being this really prominent entertainment figure. We have black pride and black confidence on this record, but also conversely, racism versus the black community and the black community versus the black community. And his lyrics are consistently witty and thoughtful and poetic and nuanced, but there are moments on here where Kendrick doesn't really mince words either. One line in particular that it's actually pretty awesome, where he's talking about music critics saying that they miss when rap was about rapping. If that were the case, motherfucker, Killer Mike would be platinum. I agree.
Okay, this is interesting. When I look at like the timeline over here, I can see that this is like one of the most watched moments in the review, or it's like been rewound a few times. Like, motherfucker, is this the first time you guys are hearing about Killer Mike? Please do not let this be the first time you were hearing about Killer Mike, especially this rap music album is very, very good. Arguably like his best and most fun solo record. This album is absolutely killer. I would hope anybody who has not heard this album before while watching this review has actually gone out of their way to listen to this record. But that is another thing that I do genuinely appreciate about Kendrick Lamar. He is very much, obviously, a music fan, a fan of numerous genres and a fan of hip hop music as well, clearly, which I know sounds weird, but look, there are a lot of rappers, and I don't begrudge anyone their music taste, who seemingly are quick to throw out there in interviews and the like that they listen to little to no rap music themselves. And maybe that has to do with just sort of, you know, competition or changing trends, or them just having very specific preferences in terms of like what rap music they like and don't like. But there is great hip hop music being made in every era of the genre. And I like that Kendrick Lamar has always been willing to work with artists who are doing great stuff in the current age, or even shout them out. And again, this goes beyond hip hop to like, for example, that funny Kamasi line on GNX, which has stood out to many, especially those who do like Kamasi Washington's music. Please listen to The Epic. It's an incredible album, amazing album. But yeah, let's continue.
As well as Kendrick's proclamations of "this dick ain't free" on the For Free interlude track.
Wait, is that why? Oh, that might have actually been why this part got rewound a few times. Could have been Killer Mike. Could have been my "this dick ain't free" impersonation. Either way, good reasons to rewind this section, honestly.
Where he's kind of talking about issues of slavery and sexuality on the song too. A track that fuses together beat poetry, jazz, and like this Saul Williams-esque insanity. It was really a moment for me on the album when I first heard it. I thought, is this genius or is this garbage? but
it turned out to be genius, guys. Spoiler alert, genius.
It only took one more listen to figure out, yeah, it's genius. And this track actually has the biggest sense of humor of any song here. While this record does have a few
You know, it's so funny because I will kind of double back here and say, like, this song continues to be to me like a mark for whether or not somebody is too dumb to get this album, because more often than not it will be this track that people go to and sort of like, you know, pull out of context with the rest of the record just to be like, look at how silly this is so stupidly silly. And they take the obvious surface level humor of what Kendrick Lamar is doing and saying on this track and they interpret it as being entirely sincere, and then they use that inability to get the joke to kind of like make a criticism that doesn't work.
It's not necessarily just Kendrick shoving an ideology down your throat or even really tell you what to think, because there are moments here where Kendrick will say something out of one side of his mouth and then maybe he'll contradict himself a little, but not necessarily just contradicting himself. I sort of see it as him trying to engage with maybe every side of the issues he's trying to tackle, showing that heavy problems such as the ones addressed on this record aren't just black and white. They're layered onions that have a lot of different factors. But despite his best intentions, there will always be people who, the moment they feel something political is going on in a piece of art, they will reel back, thinking they're too good to be told anyone else's point of view because they know the way the world works. And even if you are that kind of person, I ask you to give this album a fair shot, because it's not like Kendrick half-asses his bars on this record. I think he tries to give these topics a lot of care. He's not delivering some kind of reblogged, 140 character bumper sticker philosophy on this album. If you listen to these songs and all you get from them is, Kendrick's just bitching about being black in America, Kendrick thinks white people suck, well, that's really kind of a basic point of view. And not because Kendrick's being basic, because you're being basic. So get off that and really listen to what he's trying to say on this record. Because
it's so funny to me that like this review exists in the year of our Lord 2015, and yet there are countless, I'll say, pieces of shit. They're all pieces of shit. I'm sorry, even if you've been subscribed to me for 10 years and you do this, you're a shithead. But this review exists in the time period that it does, and people will honest to God tell you that like, I didn't start caring about or talking about politics until 2016, 2017, when in reality, no, that's when you started noticing my political opinions. I had already been talking about music that grappled with these types of racial issues and socioeconomic issues for years prior to that point, and bringing up how these issues play into the music and the messaging itself. It's only that you started noticing around this time period, so you want to put it on me like it's something I started just doing.
The way Kendrick goes about addressing things like race and sex and fame and money on this album is so artful that this record could go toe-to-toe with any album that tries to address wider social issues. This entire LP kicks off with the incredibly funky, fun, and mystical Wesley's Theory. Wait, back up. The entire record actually starts off with a sample of this Boris Gardner song.
Oh,
which,
damn.
if you give a listen
oh, my
to this
God.
Track,
okay, wow. Up there on the screen, Anthony. No censorship whatsoever, Anthony. What are you doing, brother? What are you doing, man?
It's actually a really fantastic manifesto for a lot of the moments on this album that have kind of a racial pride angle to them. So do give this track a listen if you want a bit more context for this album. But really with this track, Kendrick is kind of tipping a hat
yeah, also on top of that, like it very much plays into the album's greater themes around stardom and the exploitation of black art, black artists, and how exactly that process works. So, you know, that track almost ends up being like the shadow theme to, and when I say theme, I mean like musical theme, to the entire record's like thesis, if you will.
To Mr. Wesley Snipes. And on the verses here, he's rapping as characters. Once again, in the first verse, he's a successful artist who is blinded by the fame and wants to throw his money away on everything. The second verse here, we have an Uncle Sam character who is kind of taking advantage of this artist's ignorance to the industry.
Also, very interesting that you know, we have Kendrick kind of like portraying, pushing forward, throwing out there this visual, this abstract of an Uncle Sam, only to have that character re-embodied once again in his Super Bowl halftime show. This is a concept that, you know, he has been kind of like working with to some degree for years now, and, you know, then sort of like finds another way to work it into the messaging of what he's doing. America, Black America, so on and so forth. When he's at a new era in his career, a new platform, a new place, finding new ways to say a lot of the same stuff in a different way for new eyes, new ears, new everything.
And his money-making capability. On this track, Kendrick tries to portray that this type of success comes with its risks and its debts. The instrumental here is fantastic with appearances from George Clinton. I love his lyrics on this track. I love his vocal delivery. Look both ways before you cross my mind. Thundercat's bass on here, fantastic. And these wailing G-funk synthesizers are great too. Thematically, the song For Sale, which is a very psychedelic, dreamy interlude track. It's actually longer than a lot of the other tracks here, but interlude all the same. This track is gorgeous and talks about a lot of the same stuff. Moving forward, we get the P-Funk James Brown concoction of King Kunta. And with all the cartoony and zany background vocals and the kind of sad guitar line on this track, as well as the uppity flow, I dare say this song feels a little like old school Eminem influence too. And on this
Yeah, there is a little bit of damn, Anthony, I was listening to that song the other day, and that influence did not, especially through that guitar line, that influence did not dawn on me when I revisited the track at that time. But yeah, no, definitely like a little Marshall Mathers LP2 energy there. Damn, Anthony, you're spitting, Anthony. You're spitting, buddy.
Track, we see Kendrick kind of portraying himself as coming from just lowly beginnings, but now that he's at his artistic peak, or at least what we think is his artistic peak right now, he is kind of this King Kunta figure. The song These Walls is an incredibly sexy track about sex, as well as abusing one's fame, I think, to get laid, which plays into the bit of the poem that was recited right before this track. Kendrick actually makes direct reference to this poem in the third verse of this song, where he says he's sleeping with this girl whose man might actually be like in jail right now. Then we have songs like Institutionalized, where Kendrick...
I thought I said this in the review. Maybe it comes up later, but I don't think it does. But I know that in the wake of this album coming out, like, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who are watching this now who know, it's probably being said in the comments at some point below this video by somebody. But like a lot of fans made the connection to, one of the narratives from Good Kid, Mad City, the line on this track about the baby daddy serving life being connected to, one of the stories that is told on Sing About Me. So again, just to appreciate not only how good this song is, but also the greater interconnectedness across a lot of Kendrick's catalog. He is very much always an artist who is challenging, looking forward, trying new things, but also looking back to, in order to, take account of where he's been and reassess what has brought him to this point. And it always, resurges and pops back up in his music in interesting ways.
Has a lot of love for and a really strong desire to return to his old neighborhood, despite the fact that he's this great success now and he can really live anywhere he wants to. And it's a really multifaceted track with one beat shift after another, but sort of bringing the track from one moment to the next is Snoop Dogg with kind of a Slick Rick flow inspired by the track Children's
Snoop
Story.
Dogg, Slick Rick flow. Love that Slick Rick little nod that Snoop Dogg gives on that track.
My favorite hip hop songs of all time. And also on this track too, we have Kendrick making reference to his grandmother on one of the refrains here, talking about if you want shit to change, you better clean or wipe your ass, sort of putting it on Kendrick that if he wants things to change, if he wants things to be different, he has to enact that change. He has to put in the work in order to make that change occur. That personal responsibility I sort of see as another major theme of this album, especially on tracks like the very intense song You, where Kendrick sort of puts on himself a lot of bad things going down with family, with friends, maybe not blaming himself directly, but sort of getting really angry at himself, tearing himself apart emotionally for like not being there for his relatives and for the death of a friend. The second half of this song is incredibly heartbreaking and has Kendrick whipping out that flow where his voice is cracking and breaking all over the place, a lot like on the song Mad City. But rather than kind of pulling out this voice to portray like a young, innocent kid, he's really just broken up and drinking, and you like get the bottle sounds in this album here. It's like he's drinking in the middle of his verses, literally. I mean, you hear the alcohol swishing around, you hear the lips smacking against the bottle. And
again, love that creativity, love that attention to detail, puts you in the moment that this is all happening. It's not just a rap verse, it's not just a song, it's not just a performance, it's an intense, high stakes spiral of a moment, and Kendrick really transports us there through the sound play, through his vocal delivery, through everything. And further again, just to echo a lot of points that I made earlier about just how much of this album is about the isolation one feels once they have reached a certain point of notoriety, success, so on and so forth, which again, in a lot of ways is, for a guy like Kendrick, who is as obsessed as he is with the idea of using his power, using his influence for good, prevents you from being able to actually do that. It's almost like the barrier between the position that you're at and making some kind of like positive, impactful change to help others. But again, the difficulty of maintaining and, being in that spot, being in that position, having to be on that hamster wheel, that exploitation cycle of success. Again, that alienation that you feel from your original life, your original community, the people who once knew you, is a real thing, a real phenomenon. And, it's something that I'm sure is going on a lot of different levels throughout the arts, throughout the entertainment industry, throughout the music industry. It's just Kendrick Lamar, who I think, had the grit to kind of portray it as boldly as he did on this album.
Being there for people who are close to you, for your family, are themes that come up again on tracks like Mama, as well as Hood Politics. When these songs begin, they end on a moment in the poem where Kendrick is just going totally insane due to the very lush life he's been living, and he is going back to his home for answers. He kind of mocks himself a little bit, saying that, because he made this grand comment on the place where he's from, he knows everything, when in reality, he kind of feels out of touch. And with the track Hood Politics, I don't totally have this track deciphered, but the way I'm interpreting it thus far, it's a little bit like The Art of Peer Pressure Part 2. He's returning home and maybe falling back into his old way of doing things a little bit. And maybe how Kendrick is feeling on this track can be added up to the survivor's guilt he talks about in the ongoing poem at the end of this song that he inches a little bit further in on. And this sort of survivor's guilt makes him feel anxious and kind of uncomfortable, but this lack of comfort in one's own skin is kind of put at ease on the song You Ain't Gotta Lie, where Kendrick, I think, in a way, comes to the conclusion that he can be himself, but also be this prominent musical figure. A lot like in the same way that we have the song You, that is just filled with self-loathing, but Kendrick eventually progresses toward I, that moment where he has that self-esteem, that pride, that self-love. And the song I is surrounded by a handful of other tracks that delve into self-love, self-hate, introspection, like Blacker the Berry, as well as complexion with rap.
Okay, pause. I'm sorry I haven't added a whole lot here for the past minute or so, but fact remains I'm spitting. Fact remains I'm fucking spitting. 10 years later, I'm still spitting. There are some things that I maybe would say slightly differently about past sections or things, obviously, that I have been adding because it's been 10 years since the record has come out, and there's still, a lot to add because we have so much Kendrick career past this point to analyze and dissect since the release of this album. But I mean, pretty much everything I'm saying right now is still pretty on the money in terms of how I'm still kind of feeling about and interpreting the album's messaging today.
To Pimp a Butterfly not only comes back to the trappings of fame, but also trying to use one's status in the music world for a positive gain, not just for you, but your listeners and just the world that you exist in. It's not a story in the same way that Good Kid, Mad City is a story, but we see Kendrick change from this overly indulgent, emotional wreck to this bold, confident, graceful, smart, next-level human being. A few years ago, a lot of people got on me when I reviewed...
Yeah, just to add there, very stereotypical hero's journey, very hero's journey archetype, if you want to call it a hero's journey. It's a very hero's journey type of vibe.
Good Kid, Mad City, saying, why'd you give it a 9? Why not a 10? I mean, how much better can it get? Well, I think this album answers that question.
Yeah, it does.
I see To Pimp a Butterfly as being more daring, more ambitious, more unique, lyrically stellar. And while this album does have a philosophy to divulge, Kendrick doesn't skimp on the music on this album. He realizes that making music is about the music. If the music under your message is garbage, the music is garbage. So he has graced his messages and his point of view and his personal tales on this album with delicate, detailed, wonderful bits of jazz and funk and wherever else his heart takes him. This album instrumentally would actually be a really sweet listen as well. This project really marches to the beat of its own drum, and it might be to its detriment to an extent, because the people who might have gravitated toward the trendier sounds on Good Kid, Mad City might take a bite of this record and just say yuck instantaneously.
Damn. Man, am I the weatherman over here giving the fucking forecast for the next several years? Jesus Christ, let's go.
To some of those people, I might say, try listening to a hip hop record that came out before 2010. Other people, though,
True.
might have a beef with this record being so dense, lengthy, and kind of difficult to trudge through if you're not enjoying every single track on this album. The songs on here do require quite a bit of attention, even though I do think there are.
Yeah, I mean, another kind of thing about this record, it really is like an album's album. And, you know, what I mean about that is obviously there's a handful of tracks that over the years have grown more popular than others. Tracks we view as singles. I mean, they literally are singles, but I mean, still, none of those tracks are as good as they sound in the context of the album. You know, it's really a record, but I feel like the pure appeal and power of every single moment, it's all just enhanced in the greater context of the record, in the album experience. And, you know, that's very much the case for Good Kid, Mad City, too. But, there's tracks you can most definitely more easily isolate out of the context of that record and just kind of like enjoy completely on their own for sure. With To Pimp a Butterfly, it's just a bit harder in my view.
Are incredibly catchy standouts throughout the track list here, like All Right, as well as I and Blacker the Berry. And it's fantastic that for as famous Kendrick is right now, for as grand as this album is, and for all the success that it's seeing, Kendrick has continued to make music that is down to earth. And what's even cooler is some of the most obscure names in the feature list here are sometimes the most prominent people on the record, because it was just a few years ago, just several years ago, that Kendrick was the underdog in hip hop. And now he's making what could possibly be the best rap record of the decade.
Sorry, hold on there. Look at my face. I'm so excited about this being maybe the rap record of the decade. Look at me, the excitement on my face. This guy really wants to hear the rap record of the decade, that's for sure.
Earth, as he has gone through this artistic metamorphosis into a butterfly, really the face of hip hop's next generation. Kendrick is someone who I think signifies a new chapter and hopefully maybe a turn of the final page on the remnants of the bling era that have been holding on for dear life. I'm not trying to say every artist should try to make this record. I mean, you know, you only get so many Kendrick Lamars, so be happy with the ones that you get. But it's albums like this that people use as benchmarks in musical history. And it just happens to be fantastically enjoyable as well. I'm feeling come in.
Oh, wow. Cal wants to hear that 10
on this record.
Damn. Yeah. What am I doing? Sorry. What is Cal doing? What is Cal doing? That's not me. That's definitely not me. Who the hell is that guy? Yeah. There you go, everyone. My TPAB, To Pimp a Butterfly review and how the end slates used to look. There you go. Thank you very much for watching. I actually feel more energized after doing all that than I thought I would. Awesome ass record, fantastic ass record, biggest review on the channel. Still very proud of that review and still very much hype for that album. Again, let me know what you thought about all this in the comments. I'm sure you will. Over here next to my head, it's another video to check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, To Pimp a Butterfly, forever.